Today marks 11 years that the war on Syria began. And again, I know they like to call it a civil war. I'm sorry, man. When you got Turkey, Israel, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, the EU, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, you got a dozen countries trying to overthrow a government, that ain't a civil war. And so today marks 11 years since they started this regime change project in Syria. And, you know, it's unbelievable because I haven't been able to go back to Syria since. I haven't seen my family since. Even people outside of Syria have been affected and hurt by this war. Obviously not to the same degree as the people still inside Syria or who lived through it, but still, nevertheless, it has impacted people worldwide. They tried to destroy Syria, and they did it through covert means. The CIA began funneling weapons from Libya after they got rid of Gaddafi. They started funneling all of his arms cache over to Syria, to these jihadists. And you have various groups. You know, you had people supported by Turkey. You still do, right? You have, for example, Jaish al-Islam or Faylaq al-Rahman. These are terrorist groups that are supported by Qatar, by Saudi Arabia. And there are many, many, many of them, right? That's why I call them 50 flavors of jihad, because it's really, there's almost no difference between them. They're all very similar, but they exist nevertheless. And right now, of course, ISIS is not as big as of a threat as it used to be, but it's still there. And the situation was very bad at one point, because when you get rid of the government, you go into Libya, for example, and you get rid of Gaddafi, what happens? You've removed the order. And I know they want to babble on about how, oh, he's such a dictator. Shut the fuck up. He's not worse than your Western leaders. He's not. And when you get rid of him, you have the scum that start crawling out of the woodwork. And you have extremists who start filling in that power vacuum, right? So that's what happened in Iraq. They got rid of Saddam Hussein. And then what happens after Saddam Hussein? You have Al-Qaeda that starts taking a foothold in Iraq. You have this sectarian violence, which, again, was, I mean, nowhere near the same scale as before, right? I mean, before it was minuscule compared to that. And they started turning Shia against Sunni. And they started, you know, the CIA was letting these terrorist groups, they were, again, never forget, Zarqawi and all of these people in Al-Qaeda, they were either on U.S. payroll at one point or they were in U.S. custody at one point. They know these people. That's not a coincidence. And so after that, of course, you had ISIS. And why does this happen? Where did Al-Qaeda come from? Where did ISIS come from? How did they gain such a foothold in Iraq? We're enabled by the United States and the United Kingdom and NATO. Under Saddam Hussein, again, that guy's not far, he's far from perfect. He did a lot of messed up things. But under Saddam Hussein, he rules with an iron fist. There's no such thing as Al-Qaeda. He was enemies with Al-Qaeda. Any sort of extremism is crushed. And that is the same in Syria. Exact same thing in Syria. And of course, what happened? The United States came in and got rid of Saddam Hussein, and then they tried to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. And then what do you end up with? What happens? You have ISIS taking a place. They're taking foothold in Iraq and Syria. And I want to show you a map from 2015 just to jog your memory and convey to you how serious and how dire the situation was at one point. So half of Syria was under the control of ISIS at one point. I mean, look at that. That is astonishing. And of course, this is where the oil is. It's not a coincidence. They were plundering the oil. It's not a coincidence. And right now, this is what the map looks like. So the Syrian government has taken back Aleppo, and here ISIS is gone. But instead of ISIS, the yellow parts is, what do you have in yellow? You have the Kurdish-led SDF, so the Kurdish forces, and you have, of course, the Americans. So, you know, they got rid of ISIS, and America took their place, like literally on the ground. And right now, where did all these terrorists go? They didn't all get killed. About 20,000 of them, 20 to 30,000 of them are actually here in northern Syria, in Idlib, in this region, right? So this is occupied by Turkey and also by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is a terrorist group. It used to be called Jabhat al-Nusra, and before that it used to be called Al-Qaeda. It's Al-Qaeda. They just changed the name so people don't notice. In the West, of course. And so Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, is run by Al-Jolani, and he's, they tried rehabilitating him on PBS. I covered it here on the channel. They did an interview with him, they put him in a suit. They took him out of his regular fatigues and put him in a suit to try and, whitewash his image, make him look more serious. He's the leader of this terrorist group of Al-Qaeda in Syria. And so you still have terrorism there. You still have Daesh, ISIS. Look at these black pockets over here in the desert, in the Syrian desert. This is ISIS. And a few months ago, it wasn't there. Last year, it wasn't there because now the situation's gotten worse. And you always hear of explosions in Tadmor and Palmyra, for example. Just a few days ago, actually, you had Syrian soldiers, I think 13 Syrian soldiers that were killed in an attack. A few weeks ago, before that, the same thing. So ISIS is still there. But I want you to understand that there isn't a big difference between ISIS and the other terrorists. They're all the same. They were created by the same gang. They're still financed by the same gang, and they were enabled. Their entire existence was enabled by the same gang. If NATO had not toppled Saddam and tried to topple Bashar al-Assad, these groups would not exist. There was no such thing as ISIS. No such thing. Al-Qaeda was just in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And it spread, it was created in the first place by the CIA, but it spread over here to the Levant and then all the way to Libya because of NATO interventions. And intervention is kind of I think that's a wrong word. It's an invasion, it's an attack, it's a coup. An intervention is it's too light, honestly. But they failed. They weren't able to succeed. So despite 11 years of suffering, they weren't able to succeed. Remember, there's this article from the New York Times titled "Behind the Sudden Death of a $1 billion Secret CIA War in Syria." And so this was published in 2017, and they say that Trump ended this program where they were leading a 4-year-old effort to arm and train Syrian rebels. Now, of course, don't get confused, because there's one program which they talk about where they spent so much money and they ended up with like 50 rebels. Literally, it's like 50 people, and that's all they had to show for it, which is ridiculous. Don't get fooled by that, because it's much bigger than that. As I told you, they were sending Gaddafi's weapons, the weapons he had stocked up in Libya. After they killed him, they sent that over to the guys in Syria, the terrorists there, and then of course they were sending lethal aid and non-lethal aid. You remember the British, the Americans, they all said, we're going to send logistical support to the rebels, and we're going to help them in their fight for democracy and all this bullshit. And then accidentally, oops, all of the lethal stuff would fall into their hands. Oops, we dropped these supplies, and ISIS got a hold of them. Oops, all of the U.S. military equipment that they gave to the Iraqi army is now taken over by ISIS. Oh, and so I want to make one thing very clear, because we need to be very, very, very clear on why this failed. Why did the regime change project fail in Syria? Why did the attack fail? It failed because Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah saved Syria. The United States and NATO want to take credit for defeating ISIS. This is ridiculous, because number one, they created ISIS. They allowed ISIS to happen by creating a power vacuum in Iraq and Syria. The people in ISIS were funded, trained, and equipped by the CIA before that. They allowed this to happen. They wanted this to happen. And third, the United States, do you know what their idea of fighting ISIS was? Let me show you what Mosul looks like. You know, Mosul is a city in Iraq, and they liberated it, the Americans. Look, this is what Mosul looks like now. I mean, absolutely decimated. Absolutely decimated. This looks like Berlin in 1945. Completely decimated. They carpet bombed it. So that's their idea of defeating ISIS, right? And I want to show you Fallujah. Fallujah is known as the city of mosques. This is in 2004 when they destroyed it the first time, and then they destroyed it again in 2016. There's several battles of Fallujah, actually, right? There's several battles, and they completely decimated it. And, they called it the city of mosques, and because there's so many minarets, they destroyed so many of their mosques. I don't remember the exact figure, but in Iraq, I think they destroyed something in total. The number of mosques is absurd. The number of doctors that left Iraq after the 2003 invasion is absurd. But sorry, just going back to 2016, and when NATO came in to supposedly fight ISIS, right? Number one, no one invited the Americans. The Americans invaded Syria illegally, and under the pretext of fighting ISIS. Do you understand? Syria never allowed the US government permission to come fight ISIS. They were never, ever given permission. They invaded Syria, and they're still in Syria under the pretext of fighting ISIS, which they created. So this is completely, utterly absurd. This is completely absurd. And we have to give the real credit where credit is due, because it's Russia and it's Iran, and it is Hezbollah who saved Syria from being captured by the jihadists. And again, I don't like using the word jihadist because jihad in Islam, in Arabic, it means like a sense of duty. Originally, it's supposed to be a personal fight, like a personal duty. And they, of course, they co-opted the term and turned it into a negative connotation. And I think that's not fair. So we should just stick with the correct term for describing Al-Qaeda and these people, which is terrorists, because that's who they are. Jihad, it's a good thing in the religious context, but they weaponized it. So again, I don't think it's the right word to use. But I just want to show you a map, because you guys need to understand how close they were to capturing Damascus, the capital of Syria, where I was born. In 2018, in early 2018, the Syrian army, they launched an operation called Damascus Steel to take back the countryside, or let's say the suburbs of Damascus, which is the Ghouta. Again, let me just show you on the map what we're talking about so you can visualize this. This is Damascus here, and Ghouta is just outside in the surrounding areas here. It's you can already see it's much greener. You have farms, and of course the city of Douma, where you had this so-called fake chemical gas attack, is also in Ghouta. So basically, they started taking back the neighborhoods first. Jobar was occupied by the terrorists. They started by taking back Jobar, and then they advanced outwards into Ghouta, into this whole area, and then they took back Douma. And so the terrorists were literally here in the capital, and they had built a network of tunnels. And I want to show you on the map how close they were. Like this is Aleppo Street in Damascus. Again, I apologize for how small the map is. I'm still going to try and zoom in. But you can see the marking here. This is Aleppo Street, Shara Halab, and this is Abbasiyin Stadium. So this is a football stadium in the Saht al-Abbasiyin. I know this area very well, very, very, very well. And this is where I have cousins living. So you can walk from Shara Halab from here to Saht al-Abbasiyin literally in less than 5 minutes. So just to give you an idea of the distance here between this line here, the red is the opposition groups. And you see how they call them opposition groups? It's terrorist groups. Who are these groups? Jaish al-Islam and Ahrar al-Sham. These are terrorist groups funded by Saudi Arabia, funded by Qatar, and you have Faylaq al-Rahman as well. This is how close they were. Do you understand? This is already in the city. It's not like they're near the city. It's in the city. So I know this very, 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 very well, this area. This is home. And so they are literally blocks away from my cousins. And of course, from the old city is of a bit further down here. But just to give you an idea how close that was, and this is Damascus, right? So this is the capital. You capture Damascus, it's game over. That is how close things were. And if Iran and Russia and Hezbollah hadn't intervened, who knows what would have happened? Obviously, they would have captured the country and would have been game over. You would have the black flag of ISIS flying over Damascus. And this was for years that these terrorists were in this area. For years. They built tunnels. They were shelling Damascus. My cousin Roni, who was studying in the architecture faculty at the University of Damascus, they shelled the university, and they killed about 13 students, I think it was, in 2013. See, this is an article from the BBC. University of Damascus hit by mortars. Yeah, 15 students. There we go. So that's just one example. That's how close they were, that they were able to bomb the university and so on. Just randomly, every single day you would have mortars falling. Aleppo suffered far worse destruction, but Damascus also had its fair share. And I want to play you this clip from the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. I want you to listen to what he says. There's a translation underneath, so just look at the subtitles. It's very, very important, okay?
هل فعلا الشهيد قاسم سليماني التقى الرئيس الروسي فلاديمير بوتين وتحدث معه شخصيا حول دخول القوات الروسية إلى سوريا؟
صحيح. هو صار في نقاشات سابقة. تعرف الموقف الروسي إلى ما قبل الدخول كان موقف سياسي. يعني بالأول موقف سياسي بدأ أنه مجلس الأمن بيحطوا فيتو، بيدافعوا بيحموا، بالموضوع اللوجستي كانوا يساعدوا، بالموضوع المعلوماتي كانوا يساعدوا، إلى ما دون الحضور المباشر. وعلى كل حال المعركة في سوريا كانت التحولات بلشت فيها ثاني سنة. يعني هو الخط البياني نزول كان أول سنة، بس من السنة الثانية تقريبا بلش الخط البياني يطلع ثاني سنة ثالث سنة. لكن طبعا المعركة كانت ستطول
منتصف 2013
كان ستطول أكثر بكثير مما كانت عليه. لذلك أهمية الدخول العسكري الروسي كان مؤثر جدا، هذا لا نستطيع أن ننكره يعني. فيومها كان في تردد عند الرئيس بوتين، وبتعرف كانت روسيا تقريبا محاصرة يعني بالمنطقة، ما عندها شيء، بالشرق الأوسط كله ما عندها شيء، وحتى بأوروبا الشرقية أخذوا منها دولها، وحتى بقية بعض الدول التي كانت في جوار روسيا وفي ظلها، وفي بدأ الأمريكيون يقطفونها الواحدة تلو الأخرى. في كل الأحوال هم كان عنده قلق أنه هذا الخيار فيه مخاطرة، مغامرة خاسرة، أو خطوة يمكن أن يكتب لها النجاح. هون ما كان النقاش السياسي هو اللي بيخليه يقتنع، بده نقاش عسكري. فوقتها أخونا الحاج قاسم طبعا صار تنسيق بين إيران وروسيا، وذهب الحاج قاسم سليماني إلى موسكو والتقى بالرئيس بوتين، ولمدة ساعتين، يعني الوقت كمان مهم، وبحضور عدد من المسؤولين المعنيين عسكريين وأمنيين وسياسيين. ووقت الحاج هو حكى لي يعني
نعم.
عم نحكي هون مباشر، يعني ما في سند عن فلان عن فلان. فبيقول على الطاولة أنا وضعت الخرائط، الواقع الحالي، أين نحن يعني كل الجيش السوري وكل من معه من أصدقاء، أين الجماعات المسلحة، المناطق، ما هي فرص العمل، ما هي فرص النجاح. عمل له قراءة استراتيجية للوضع في سوريا والمحيط، والفكرة المطروحة، وما هي النتائج المتوقعة. طبعا عم يحكي كلام علمي موضوعي عسكري ميداني، وعلى الخريطة وعلى المساحة وعلى الأرقام والأعداد. في تلك الجلسة الرئيس بوتين قال للحاج أنا اقتنعت، وعلى ضوء تلك الجلسة اتخذ هذا القرار. هذا ما سمعته أنا من الأخ الحاج قاسم سليماني، وبعدين هذا معروف
يعني نستطيع القول أن الدخول الروسي كان بمبادرة إيرانية بالتشاور مع دمشق أو بطلب سوري؟
وبطلب سوري، السوري كان يرغب في هذه المشاركة،
ولكنه لم يطلب مباشرة.
لم يطلب من الروس.
نعم.
ما عندي علم، لكن أنا بفترض أنه طلب، بفترض أنه طبيعي يكون طلب يعني. لأنه كان حقيقة،
ولكن بوتين اقتنع
في حاجة، كان في حاجة إلى المساعدة يا أستاذ غسان، في قيادة وفي نظام وفي بلد، في حرب كونية عليه يعني.
لا شك لا شك. نعم.
So you guys see Nasrallah, who's the head of Hezbollah, explaining that the Russians actually did not want to enter Syria, right? And it's only until because the Syrian government asked them for help, and the Russians initially didn't want to. They helped in other ways, but in terms of actually having Russian planes and forces fighting this war, no. And Haj Qasim, who's the General Solmani, who Trump assassinated, he was the head of the Quds Force, which is a branch of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. He goes to Moscow and finally he's able to convince Putin to accept Syria's invitation, and that's how the Russians come in. And that's really the moment when they turn the tide of the war, because Hezbollah and Iran were already helping Syria since, I think, 2012, 2013, around this period, but Russia only comes in around 2015, 2016. the situation was very, very, very dire. And this is even mentioned in the New York Times article that I just showed to you. They even say that the rebel army, backed by the U.S., was a shell hollowed out by more than a year of bombing by Russian planes and confined to ever-shrinking patches of Syria that government troops had not reconquered. So basically, they admit that the Russians really hollowed out the so-called rebels. And of course, this is the truth they don't want you to know, because they want you to think that, oh yeah, the United States defeated ISIS, and that's why the United States is in Iraq with Operation Inherent. God, these names are so horrible. I forgot what it's called. Inherent Freedom. So they're occupying Iraq under the guise of fighting ISIS, and they're in Syria, protecting the oil, stealing the oil, and pretending to fight ISIS. This is all nonsense. This is all nonsense. This is economic warfare. This is they're grasping at straws. They have nothing left because they failed to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. They did not anticipate. I really think they did not expect the Russians to come in. They failed in their calculation. They clearly miscalculated, because Russia was willing to step in, and at that point there's nothing they could do anymore. There's nothing they could do anymore, because if the Americans then go in, that's a nuclear war, and then of course we have the same kind of dynamic. But you get the idea. We have to give credit where credit is due, and of course you have many people who hate Hezbollah, they hate Bashar al-Assad, they hate the Russians, they hate Iran. Okay, that's your opinion, but looking at what happened, the historical fact, it's because of Russia and Iran and Hezbollah that Syria was able to survive this regime change project, and that these terrorist groups have been now confined to just Idlib. They've all been bussed in these green buses. They drove them up to northern Syria and put them there instead of having them in central Damascus, or in Ghouta and Douma. And of course, I just want to show you again on the map, when they launched Operation Damascus Steel in February 2018, in about 2 months, it didn't even take them 2 months to recapture all of Ghouta and also Douma. Okay? And so this is what's so funny to me, because right when the Syrian government, the Syrian army has liberated Jobar, and they've taken back Ghouta, and they've basically taken the last thing left is Douma. All of a sudden there's this chemical gas attack. Now you guys tell me something. When you're winning a battle and you basically finished, you've conquered the enemy, you've taken back everything, you've accomplished the goal, do you use chemical weapons to kill like 30 civilians? Who the fuck does that? How does that make any sense? How does that make any sense? Can you show me one example of anyone doing that in history? Anyone who's winning a battle and then on the last day just decides to gas a couple of civilians and does the only thing that's going to make sure that the US and the UK and the United Kingdom and France bomb you? What idiot would do that? How do you expect us to believe this? This is so stupid, and that's what they want you to believe. This is the kind of stuff that they expect you to swallow. Because of course they're not going to tell you that. They're not going to reveal these details to you because that would be educating you. They don't want to educate you. They want to keep you ignorant. So again, I want to show you just a timeline of this, how they took back all of Ghouta. You see that all in green? That's what it was in the beginning. And look how they're taking it back bit by bit. This is all through February. The green is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. 1st of April, there's just this tiny patch left. And Jaish al-Islam are finished. And then all of us, so the Syrian government has taken back all of this, and then they just suddenly decide to use chemical weapons. Wow. You expect us to believe that? Amazing. But of course, right now, Syria is not free. Syria is under sanctions, and I think this is the punishment, because they know that they weren't able to win militarily, so economically they can try and strangle Syria. So right now, since June 2020, Donald Trump, he put the Caesar Act sanctions on Syria. So anyone who wants to invest in Syria, like if you want to, you want to build roads, you want to build schools, anything you want to do in Syria, you're not allowed to, because the United States government will punish you. So these are some of the worst sanctions, the strictest sanctions, the harshest sanctions in modern history. Okay? The United States by itself, this is not allowed under international law, but they've done it anyway. They basically tried to isolate Syria economically and prevent other countries from investing and helping with the reconstruction, because Syria needs a lot of reconstruction. And of course, another way that you strangle Syria economically is not just with sanctions, which is like a siege warfare, but it's also by taking the revenue away, right? So again, if we were talking about how Saudi Arabia and Russia and Iran, they're major oil exporters, Syria is not a major oil exporter, but it does have oil. And inside Syria, that oil is 25% of the government's revenue. That's 1/4 of the government's revenue coming from oil. And what happened with the oil? I showed you before how ISIS had taken the oil. They were selling it to Turkey and smuggling it out, because the oil is over here in Deir ez-Zor and Hasake. So in these two governorates, right? You have some major oil fields right here. I hope you can see where I'm circling. So down here in in eastern and northeastern Syria, the Omar oil fields are there. And now instead of ISIS, who do you have? You have the Americans. You can see actually the oil wells here on the map, these little black spots, right, representing these the big oil fields. So there's a big concentration over here and a big concentration up here. And it's not just the oil in this region. This region in Syria is called the breadbasket region, because Syria grows wheat and cotton and many things. Before the war, Syria used to be a net exporter of wheat, because that's how much wheat Syria had. It had a surplus. It had so much wheat that it's able to sell it and export it. And, to countries like Italy and so on. And now this is what it looks like in Syria. So the same country that was exporting wheat now has bread lines. You have people queuing up to buy bread because there's no bread. You have to wait hours just to get one bag of bread, which barely feeds a family, and I don't need the pictures to tell you that. My cousins told me this. And the same thing with gas. If you want, for your car, you have to wait sometimes 2 fucking days in the queue at the gas station. 2 days. Can you imagine that? You're waiting 2 days with your car just to get fuel in some cases. The electricity is also crap. When I used to go to Syria the last time, so in 2010 or 2011, the electricity would not cut anymore. That was always an issue in Syria. We don't have enough electricity, and every single day or every couple of days it would cut for a few hours. But that didn't happen anymore in 2010. And then the war starts. It destroyed the country. Now you have bread lines, and now there's no electricity. So you get maybe 4 hours electricity a day in Damascus, 6 if you're lucky. My cousin told me no one eats meat anymore because it goes bad in the fridge all the time. You can't keep it in the fridge because the electricity goes off, the fridge is not working. They're not going to tell you that because they want you to think that this is punishing Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad doesn't feel shit from the sanctions, man. Just like Putin their lifestyle doesn't change. They still have access to goods. They can afford everything they want. They're not affected by this in any way. At all. Nothing. They keep their Mercedes. They keep their nice cars and houses and palaces and their bread. They're fine. But it's the civilians who are not fine. And of course, this is much worse than just, not only are people starving, but of course, this means that Syria cannot import medical parts. So if you're a hospital and you need an x-ray machine, screw you. Good luck getting the x-ray machine. Germany and the other countries that manufacture these specialized medical equipment are not going to sell it to you because they'll get in trouble with the US. If you want you need replacement parts for the commercial airliners, screw you. Boeing is not going to sell it to you. Airbus is not going to sell it to you. Good luck. It's an economic war more than anything. And if you think that's a joke, my cousins told me that the sanctions are so bad, they would rather go back to having the mortars, the bombs falling down on them when you had Jaish al-Islam and Ahrar al-Sham and Faylaq al-Rahman, all these terrorist groups inside Damascus and lobbing mortars and killing students. They would rather go back to this than have the sanctions, because at least under the war, you could actually get electricity and it would still cut off, but you could get fuel, you could get bread, at least to a much higher degree than you can now. So if you think sanctions are not deadly, you're an idiot or a liar. And in most cases, they're liars because they tell you on the media that, oh yeah, we're going to punish the regime. You're not punishing anyone in the so-called regime. You're just hurting civilians. That's the only thing you're doing. So again, although Syria has been mostly liberated from these terrorists, there's still ISIS here. There's still a U.S. airbase down here in El Tanaf. And there is still the U.S. occupying the oil, choking Syria's revenue. And then, of course, you still have the Turkish army occupying Idlib and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham over there. So Syria has been cut into 4 or 5 parts. And, of course, you have the Israelis down here, right, occupying the Golan Heights since 1967. Right, and Naftali Bennett, the Israeli prime minister, he just unveiled some plan in December to double the number of settlements, illegal settlements in the Golan Heights. You know, so the Golan Heights has oil, has snow, has water. It's an important strategic point, and the Israelis stole it. And they are not only just occupying it, but increasing the number of settlements, which violates a bunch of UN Security Council resolutions, 242 to name one. And they, of course, illegally annexed it. Right, just like they annexed Jerusalem. They passed a law in Israel stating that, yeah, the Golan Heights are Israeli and Jerusalem is part of Israel. And the UN has come out and said, no, screw you. We don't recognize that. It's not Israeli. You have no right to do that. But they don't care because Israel is above international law. You know, so I love it when they talk about sovereignty in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Syria has been chopped up into like 15 parts. I mean, just look at the number of colors. Look at that. Look at that. Look how many parts it's been chopped up into. And who started this? The Israelis and the Americans. NATO. NATO did this. Again, even Turkey. Turkey is a NATO country. Right? Although, of course, Erdogan's ambitions are something else. But look at how Syria has been cut up into 15 parts. Look how it's being starved. Look how many people turned refugees. You know, half of Syria's population was displaced in the war. Half the population displaced. Can you imagine how shocking that is? I mean, it's awful. It's really awful. My family, you know, many of my cousins, they're gone. They don't live there anymore. There's no one there. It's horrible. I don't blame them. But what do you think that does for the future of the country? Who's going to rebuild it? You know, like now the West, who take in the refugees, they got all the educated people, the doctors, the lawyers, the architects. So those, it's a brain drain. Those people flee the war and go to the West, and then the West benefits from these professions. And of course, they benefit from, again, I hate this word, unskilled labor, but let's say manual labor, people who are just doing white collar, but blue collar jobs. In both cases, it makes no difference what job you are. You're benefiting from a workforce, yes? Thankfully, Russia and China, they've given the finger, and Iran has given the finger to these U.S. sanctions. Russia, China, Iran are not afraid to deal with Syria, and they will be part of the reconstruction, and Syria just entered the Belt and Road Initiative, right? So obviously, I don't think the Belt and Road Initiative on its own will be enough to help rebuild Syria, but it's a damn good start, and it's very good that Syria is strengthening ties with China. China's the future. And I want to read to you just some tweets, just some closing remarks. This is from Pepe Escobar. He said, 11 years ago, the U.S. lack of intelligence complex launched a massive covert op to regime change Damascus using so-called moderate rebels. They killed hundreds of thousands of Syrians and turned millions into refugees. They failed miserably because of Syria, Iran, and Russia. And of course, we should add Hezbollah. And here Hadi Nasrallah said, today marks the 11th anniversary of the CIA-backed so-called Syrian revolution. 11 years of unconditional Western support for global terrorism. 11 years of NATO-sponsored ethnic cleansing of minorities. 11 years of fatal sanctions. 11 years of looting Syria's resources. Some of NATO's rebels committed these massacres, right? So, I mean, the list is just enormous. And honestly, this is, I think Hadi would have included many more, but there's a character limit in the tweets, right? This is nothing. This is a drop in the water, these massacres. There's so much more. It's horrible. And I want to show you this. Look at what the rebels that Obama was backing did. Look, they caged women. They literally put 400 Alawites, so Alawi women, in fucking cages. These are the moderate rebels that Obama backed, that Trump backed, that the United States and the West are backing. They put them in cages. So again, this makes me so angry, right? It's just like in Ukraine. Oh yeah, we're helping the Ukrainians fight for their democracy. They don't tell you what the fucking neo-Nazis that they're giving weapons to, huh? What about them? You just conveniently leave that out? That you have a very, very powerful chunk of neo-Nazis? And just like in Syria, the moderate rebels, they're not moderate and they're not rebels. They're guns for hire. They're mercenaries. They're foreigners who came to Syria, which you paid. You gave them weapons from Libya and you used them for regime change. This is not a revolution. It's a coup. And the scum of the earth, the United States and its allies and Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Qatar and Israel, they were helping religious extremists, Al-Qaeda, ISIS. They encouraged this. They created this. They financed this. They funded this and then lied to you and told you they're moderate rebels. Bullshit. This is a drop in the water. This is so horrible. These photographs are so horrible. And it's just a drop in the water. That's just to give you an idea how many atrocities have happened. They do this, of course, to the Alawites because Alawis are a minority. Christians are a minority. I mean, Christians make, like me, we make up one of the biggest minorities in Syria, 10%. So 10% of Syrians are Christian. Alawites is much smaller. So Alawites are Muslim, but they're much smaller and in terms of numbers. But that's the thing with Syria. Syria has so many different groups. You have Palestinians, Armenians, Druze, Jews, Christians, Sunni, Shia, Alawi, Bedouin. It just goes on and on. The Syriac, Assyrian, Kurdish. There's so many ethnic groups. It's a real melting pot. It's a real patchwork. And that's why it makes me very angry because Syria had this like really great harmony and not tolerance. No one's tolerating the other. It's coexistence. I like that word much more. And that's really, really what it is. No one cares what religion you are. No one cares, whether you're Armenian or you're Syrian or you're whatever or you're Palestinian, you're just Syrian, and that's something I lived and I saw with my own eyes, and I will never forget. And that is Syria for me, and no one can tell me otherwise. And so when I see things like this, like these photos that I just showed you, this horrific discrimination, this barbaric, it makes me furious. It makes me fucking angry, really. This makes me want to. I'm gonna lose it, and I'm not even Muslim. So this makes me furious, really, because they didn't just destroy the country with the infrastructure, killing people, sanctions. They're destroying the fabric, the social fabric that we have, which is very rare because in the West they claim that they have diversity and they want to treat black people and Muslims and minorities equally, but they don't. They don't really. When I compare that to how it is in Syria, it's completely different. In Syria, it's the real deal. And that's obvious because actually these religions and groups, these ethnic groups, where do they come from? They come from that region, right? They come from the Levant, Muslims, Jews, Christians. They started there. That's the birthplace and of course the cradle of civilization, which makes me all the more angry when you see things like Palmyra destroyed. Palmyra is an ancient city, one of the oldest in the world. And ISIS destroyed the gate. They blew up this gate, which I visited, when I was young. This is the arch, the famous arch. They blew this up. Unbelievable. I mean, even the Nazis didn't do that. The Vichy French who were collaborating with the Nazis didn't do that. The Romans didn't do that. The Ottomans didn't do that. Not one occupier did this kind of savagery, this barbarism. Of course, they stole a lot of things, but destroying on purpose. I mean, it happens, of course. It happens, but it is rare, and it makes me so angry because it doesn't exist anymore. And then you know what they did in London? Look what they did in London. They created a replica in the middle of Trafalgar Square. They unveiled this like replica of it. I mean, look at that. They unveiled a replica. Fuck your replica. Fuck you and fuck your replica. Why were we supporting these terrorists who blew up the real one? What, again, with these useless neoliberal gestures. Screw your replica. Stuff it up your ass. Why did you help destroy the original? This makes me so fucking angry. And then it's not just that. There's also a Roman amphitheater in Palmyra, which was, again, built by the Romans. Just to show you the difference of what this war did and what kind of change it brought to Syria. So before, cultural events, you have people dancing, doing ballet in the Roman amphitheater in Syria, in Palmyra. And then ISIS captures it and they use it to execute people there. This is how Syria was before in the top under Bashar al-Assad. And then on the bottom, this is the NATO-backed so-called rebels and liberation and democracy. Screw you and go stuff it up your ass. If that's your democracy, we don't want it. Unbelievable. And they come up with a million, trillion excuses. Oh, but no, we were never supported these guys. And they just, we were supporting moderates. Shut your goddamn mouth. You supported removing Bashar al-Assad. You supported rebels. You armed them to the teeth. You gave them money, training, everything. And you set them on the loose. And this is the result. Own it. Because you did it. You, the West, you, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Israel, Qatar, all of these countries, they did this. It's not just the West, it's their allies in the region as well. They destroyed so many things. The Umayyad Mosque in Aleppo, which I never got to visit. Look what they did. Look at the before and after. Do you see that? They destroyed it. And there's also the market in Aleppo, which is, I think it was a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I think it's the oldest souk, as we say in Arabic, a market or a bazaar rather. In the world, and it burnt down. And it was part of the Silk Road, the original Silk Road. You know, the one that China's doing now, the new Silk Road? They're reviving the ancient Silk Road, the ancient trade routes, which used to go through Syria and Palmyra. Remember, I just showed you Palmyra? Palmyra was on the Silk Road. So that's why I'm happy when I see Syria joining the new Silk Road with China, because that's how it used to be. People used to come from China and pass through Palmyra. That's it. How it was, exactly how it was. So I love seeing that. But this is very sad that what happened to the bazaar here, to Aleppo's bazaar, which I never got to visit, unfortunately. I don't know how well you can see that, but it's quite devastating. That's before in the top, and then this is at the bottom. This is, again, these are just a few examples. Like what I'm showing you, this is a drop in the water, a drop in the water. And then they give you this cheap crap over here that no one cares about, some replica in the middle of a European city. So this is again, obviously, like at the end of the day, these are just a bunch of bricks. They're a bunch of stones, but they have value not just for Syria. I think for the human race, because this is ancient history, and for me, this is a crime against humanity to destroy these things. This is a crime against humanity. And one more thing I wanted to add with Palmyra. As I was just showing you, Palmyra has a museum, and I've been there. And the terrorists, you know what they did? They took the director of the museum and they tortured him to get him to reveal where he had hidden some of the most precious artifacts, because they either smashed them. They even posted this on the internet. They filmed themselves smashing the museum. I mean, it makes me so angry. I don't even want to play it. And then the most precious things, he hid them from them, right? He's an archaeologist. He's the director of the museum. And they killed him. They tortured him and then killed him. And it's only last year they found his body, the director. You know why they wanted the precious pieces? Because they want to sell them. A lot of this stuff goes on the black market. It makes tons of money because it has that value. So ISIS was either taking the oil and selling the oil to Turkey and others, or they were taking precious artifacts. And not just them, a lot of people, they loot. It's looting. Here, this article from The Guardian. Beheaded Syrian scholar refused to lead ISIS to hidden Palmyra antiquities. Khaled al-Assad. Or is it Assad or al-Assad? I don't know, because they've Romanized it. I can't. But he was 82, and they interrogated him for a month before they murdered him. That's him. That's a real hero. And speaking of heroes, there's a Russian soldier, actually, who, let me show you. Because it's in Palmyra as well, if I'm not mistaken. Alexander Prokorenko. Okay? Let me show you how he died in Syria. So he was killed during the Palmyra offensive of the Syrian civil war. During his last moments, he was surrounded on all sides by ISIS fighters, and he decided to order an airstrike at his own position, killing himself and all of the approaching terrorists. And he was declared a hero of the Russian Federation by Putin, which is Russia's highest honor. This guy's a hero. He's not just a Russian hero, he's a Syrian hero. And he's a hero for humanity because, again, Palmyra is an ancient city, and he helped to protect it, and he deserves a lot of respect. He's most certainly a hero. And again, like I said, not just for Russia, but all of humanity. So, there's a lot of things. Again, I guess this video is already a bit long now, but, so's the war and the topic. And I just want to talk and say everything that comes to mind. Again, even for me, I'm actually stunned sometimes. I'm always discovering new things about Syria that I didn't know. For example, one thing I didn't know about were the dead cities. There's something called the dead cities in Syria. These are old, they're a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And these are located between Aleppo and Idlib, and there are about 40 villages that were built during the Byzantine or Byzantine period, right? So they were abandoned between the 8th and the 10th century. And I mean, these are like old archaeological ruins. I've never heard of these. And it's just astonishing how much history there is in Syria, So I haven't visited these. But of course, these are, again, where are they? They're in Idlib, where you have the terrorist stronghold right now, basically. Here's Idlib. So they're between Aleppo and Idlib, somewhere around here. I didn't know that until a few months ago. I was always, again, I'm always surprised learning these things. And, of course, there's many other things that were destroyed. The Crac des Chevaliers, which is the best preserved Middle. Let me say this again. It's a castle from the Middle Ages and from medieval times, and it's the best preserved castle in the world. And it's in Syria, and they hit that too. It got destroyed. I don't know who did it, but it suffered damages, and they were rebuilding it. And there's of course the town of Ma'lula. So Ma'lula is this city. It's a town. It's not a city. It's very tiny. It's about 1 hour from Damascus, and they speak Aramaic. So for those of you who don't know, the language that Jesus spoke, at his time was Aramaic. It's a dead language. It's like Latin. No one speaks it anymore. But in this town, they do. In Ma'lula, they do speak it. Even though actually most of the inhabitants are Muslim, but it has a covenant there. It's in the mountains, basically, And I've been here 1,000,000 times. This is the covenant of Saint Tekla. Again, 1,000,000 times I've been here with my cousins. I love it. There's also nearby, there's a monastery of Mar Serkis. And this monastery is one of the oldest monasteries, Christian monasteries in the world. So again, I was telling you about this the other day because you have these ignorant people who say like, oh, these Syrians, or, the Ukrainians are Christian and they're civilized, unlike those Syrians. Like, what are you even talking about? Like, Christianity comes from Syria. It doesn't come from Ukraine or New York or wherever else. So that's why I get so annoyed, because they say these ignorant things. And again, as if someone's religion matters. I don't care what religion you are. If you're a refugee, you're a refugee. Well, that shouldn't affect your right to seek asylum. But even if you entertain their stupid discriminatory logic, it doesn't even make sense then. That's my point. In any case, just going back to Syria, it's... and actually, that is a point, because the way that Syrian refugees were treated, yes, actually, countries like Germany, they did take them in. They were very welcoming. But many countries in Eastern Europe, like Hungary, they treated refugees from Syria and Afghanistan like crap. And then all of a sudden they have open arms for Ukrainians. Great. I'm happy you're welcoming Ukrainians with open arms. Why not welcome everyone with open arms and give everyone an equal chance to seek asylum, In any case, Ma'lula, the reason I brought up Ma'lula was because in 2013, it was attacked by these terrorists. They kidnapped the nuns. Again, I sat down with when I was younger, with these nuns, me and my mother and my aunt and my cousins, and they, we had coffee with them in Ma'lula, in the town, and they're very nice. I don't remember their names or something, but it's scary to think that they were kidnapped and they were held hostage by these terrorists for many, many, many months. And when they captured this was really big news, because they came in and smashed everything. You know, these terrorists, they would come in and they smashed, you know, the crosses and everything Christian. And that's the thing, because they treat anyone who doesn't abide by their takfiri logic as inferior, even other Muslims, right? So if you're a Muslim but you don't follow their kind of their brand of Islam, this extremism, this Wahhabism exported by Saudi Arabia, and they kill you. So, you know, a Christian or anyone who doesn't adhere, who doesn't follow, they kill them. So it wasn't just against Christians, you understand? And this was not an issue before. There was never a persecution of Christians in Syria. This is absurd. Everything was completely fine. I'm telling you that. And they came in here and they took the town. They took Ma'lula. And the Syrian army tried very hard to liberate it, and they did. Actually, Hezbollah liberated it, which just gives you an idea again, because this is a Christian town. And, you know, the Israelis and the West say, oh yeah, Hezbollah, they're just terrorists. They're religious extremists. Complete nonsense. Why are they liberating a Christian town then? You know, their narrative just falls apart when you add the truth, when you just give a little bit of truth. It just completely crumbles because it's complete nonsense. And of course, the same can be said about Solmani, General Solmani, who was killed by Trump. That guy, they say, oh yeah, he was just defending Shias because, you know, Iran is predominantly Shia Muslim. And so they say that Iran was only in Syria because of religious... That's complete nonsense. That complete, utter nonsense. And I can just show you here how, because, you know, by fighting in Syria and defeating these terrorists, they saved Christians. Not just other Muslims, but Christians as well. And that's why when Solmani was killed by Trump, you had in Syria... Let me show you this. You had people in Syria in church holding mass for Solmani. That's how much he's loved. Muslim and Christian alike. So again, Trump is going to tell you he's a terrorist, but that's Trump. And that's Pompeo speaking. That's the West speaking. That's not the truth. Look at this. This is, I think Hadi posted this a while back, right? So look at this. This is in a church. This is a priest in Syria. Look what he's saying. Again, I'll zoom in so you can see the subtitles a bit. There's a particular line that he says here. He said, all what Qasem Soleimani and who's with him ever did was stand up against ISIS. That's the truth, man. They don't want you to know that because... See? He said, who are the victims of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Jabhat al-Nusra? Aren't they Christians? Aren't they the social diversity in this country? So the reason in the West they say Soleimani was a terrorist is because he foiled their plans to regime change in Syria. So what Soleimani was doing was fighting ISIS, fighting Al-Qaeda, along with the Russians, along with Hezbollah. And that's why they call Iran a state sponsor of terrorism. They are actually the terrorists. Trump and Obama, who are funding ISIS, who are enabling ISIS and Al-Qaeda to kill Muslims, to kill Christians, to kill everyone. And when you stop them, they call you a terrorist. It's always projection. And so you hear that from me, a Syrian Christian. You hear that from this priest, another Syrian Christian. Go hear it from others, and you will. That Soleimani protected minorities. He saved them from these terrorists, and not just minorities, but everyone, the country, the fabric of the nation. So I think this is really important context. Maybe some of you already heard me say this stuff, but a lot of you are new. And this is really important context because you never hear this. And you know what really made me angry? Mike Pompeo. Again, you guys remember Mike Pompeo. He was the Secretary of State just before Blinken under Trump. This is outrageous. He went on camera. I'm going to show you this right now. And he said some of the most disgusting, one of the most disgusting lies I've ever heard come out of his mouth, which is really something, given that this guy used to head the CIA and was Secretary of State. So he tells a lot of lies. Remember, he says, we lied, we cheated, we stole. That's a direct quote. But look at what he said here. This is after they assassinated Soleimani. This is outrageous. Look at this.
Middle East. When Iran threatened, the president approved a strike that killed the Iranian terrorist, Qasem Soleimani. This is the man most responsible in the Middle East. When Iran threatened, the president approved a strike that killed the Iranian terrorist, Qasem Soleimani. This is the man most responsible for the murder and maiming of hundreds of American soldiers and thousands of Christians across the Middle East.
What? He murdered and maimed thousands of Christians across the Middle East? What complete bullshit. I've never heard of one Christian being murdered or maimed by Soleimani. What complete diarrhea. This guy, Pompeo, and Trump, they're trying to appeal to these evangelical fucking nut jobs in the United States who have nothing to do with Christianity. I don't know what the hell they're practicing. There's nothing to do with the Christianity we practice in Syria and Palestine. You know, the real thing that comes from there, that comes from our place. And so he thinks by making up this outrageous lie that, Soleimani was killing Christians, that he's going to like play on the heartstrings of Christians in America who are listening to that. He's going to justify a murder, an extrajudicial assassination by saying, by making up that the target, the victim, was killing Christians. I mean, this makes me so fucking angry because it's the complete opposite. It's not just a lie, it's the opposite. You, Mike Pompeo, former head of the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, your agency was killing Christians. Soleimani was saving Christians, you fucking liar. This makes me so angry because it's not just a lie, it's the complete opposite of the truth. 180 degrees. It's so low. So low. I've never heard that. Not even the people who hate Soleimani say these sorts of things, except Pompeo. Never heard such a lie. It's so outrageous. God. And again, I'm telling you all this because it shows you how different the narrative is in the Western press about everything. About Russia, what Russia's doing in Syria, about what Iran is doing in Syria, what happened to minorities in Syria, what was the goal in Syria, who did the West use in Syria and their allies in the region, Saudi Arabia. They never tell you any of this. What kind of destruction took place in Syria, right? What happened to civilians? What's happening with sanctions? The refugees, the historical sites, the ancient cities, the UNESCO World Heritage Sites destroyed. They never tell you this, ever. All they say, Bashar al-Assad, the regime, bad. That all they have, whether they're talking about North Korea or Russia or Iran or Syria, it's the same fucking script every single time. All they say is, regime, very bad, human rights. These buzzwords over and over, just programming people like sheep. It drives me nuts. It really drives me nuts. I mean, again, just to give you context with Ma'lula, these nuns were kidnapped by Western-backed terrorists, and Hezbollah had to liberate this city. Never forget that, right? Just another truth that they don't want you to know. And another thing I would say is that this is, again, it's not even about minorities because most Syrians are Muslims. And it's the same thing in Libya and Afghanistan. Like, who gets hurt the most? It's the civilians, and the majority of these civilians are Muslim. So, they support these groups like Al-Qaeda and Jabhat al-Nusra and all of these different flavors. And who is the number one victim? Who are the number one victims of these terrorist groups? They are Muslims. They're other Muslims. And they also, they by enabling these groups to exist like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they dirty the name of Islam. They make people fear Muslims. They make people think that Islam is violent. These are nut jobs. They are religious extremists, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. They're no different from the Crusaders, who are also nut job religious extremists, who are actually, they're not really religious. I think that's the wrong word, because they're pursuing political goals and hiding behind religion. They use the religion as a cover, as a story, right? The Crusaders did the same thing. They came to Jerusalem. What did they do when they got to Jerusalem? They killed the Christians. They killed everyone. They massacred Jerusalem, and they didn't care that they were killing Christians, right? They say they came to liberate the Holy Land. Oh no, they massacred everyone, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, right? And then ISIS, Al-Qaeda, they kill other Muslims. And Israel is another form of so-called religious extremism. It's a political ideology hiding behind religion. So for me, these are all the same thing. The Crusaders, ISIS, Israel, Zionism, these are the same thing, and they're actually ironically happening in the same area, right? You have people with political goals using religion as a cover. But in any case, I digress. I just wanted to kind of just talk a bit about Syria and many things that I have in mind. And it's it makes me very sad. I don't know. My cousins told me not to go back. They said it's so bad and different, and they said it's like, when you have good memories of a place, they told me don't go back because they'll be ruined. But the thing is, I feel like I have to. Obviously, I want to, of course, but I haven't been able to because of the war. But very soon, I think I'm going to. I told you guys a little bit about this. I think I'm gonna make a film, and I'm gonna do that with my cousin. We spoke about this with Roni, and we have to do this. I don't want to, in some ways, but we have to tell the story, other people's stories, like you won't hear, because we can't let them control the narrative. We can't let them write the historical record. I'm not going to let that happen. I'm not tolerating that. If I can do something about it, I'm going to do it. And I think this is one of the things we can do. So again, that's something that would be funded by you guys, because I told you that, I have other possibilities. I could ask others to fund it, but I think it's better to do it independently. Not because I'm afraid of not having like editorial control. I would have that either way. Otherwise, I would never do anything. So of course, I would do this my way, regardless of who's paying for it. But I think just so, because when you make a film like this, they're going to attack it. They're going to try and attack you in every way possible. So the best thing to do is to have it completely independently funded by you guys, crowdfunded, crowdsourced. And I think you guys would agree with me. You showed a lot of support for the idea. But this is, again, it's for the future. So that's all I'm going to say for now. And of course, if we decide to go ahead, if we can go ahead, I will let you guys know, of course, inshallah. They failed they failed with the regime change, so that's why they're making Syria suffer now. That's why. They're choking the people. They're punishing them. And you see, again, there's no difference with Biden and Trump. Same thing. I told you this is going to happen. This is to be expected. Of course, no surprise. No surprise whatsoever.